Right, ladies and gentlemen, councillors, we'll start the proceedings. There are some more copies of the presentation being printed as we speak. Some of you have them, some don't. We will update, but if we start with the opening up the meeting, and then we will catch up with those other copies as we go. So can I just welcome everybody? You all look to be familiar faces, so I don't need to tell you, I'm sure, that this is a meeting held in public, not a public meeting. So other than the public speakers that will be invited to come forward and speak, we hope that you will be able to allow the meeting to progress in a reasonable manner. There are no fire alarms or proposed, so and we haven't got on the screen the emergency procedures, but the emergency procedures, as always, are if there is a fire alarm that goes off, it is a real alarm. We have 3 exits that we can use, one to the right of me, one immediately in front of me, and the main one that you come in. If we have a fire alarm, then we will ask you not to try to use the lift because the electrics might fail, and we will then meet under the canopy of Waitrose over the road. So with that, I move on to item 1, minutes of the agenda, minutes of the last meeting, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of June 2016. It's at your wish that I sign those. Thank you very much. Gary, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. We have received apology for absence from Councillors Peter Isherwood, Mike Band, Mary Forzeski, Stephen Mulliner, Nick Williams and John Williamson. Councillors Patricia Ellis, Simon Inchbold, John Fraser and Jim Edwards are in attendance tonight as substitutes.
Thank you very much. And questions from members of the public? So, sorry, I missed out declarations of interest.
Yes, Chairman, we have received a declaration of non-pecuniary interest from Councillor Williamson. This is in relation to both applications being considered tonight, as he is involved in a potential judicial review for East Street. Consequently, he has sent his apologies for the meeting this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I declare an interest as a member of Farnham Town Council, but I am coming to this application afresh, bearing in mind the papers we have before us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to notify you in the committee that I intend to withdraw from the meeting this evening for the reason that if I stayed, I believe that I would be infringing the Councillor's Planning Code of Good Practice, recently circulated to us by the officers. This makes it clear that a councillor can't take part in a planning committee meeting if they have predetermined any of the decisions before the committee and thus are not approaching the decision with an open mind. To take part could put the council at risk of finding of maladministration. In terms of one of the decisions before the committee, the proposal that the Brightwells Gostry Centre should be removed from the scheme and that the resultant space occupied by retail food and drink, I feel that I am in the position of having predetermined this decision and would like to explain why. I'm quite happy to read this slowly to take up some time until you sort out your problems. The decision to remove the Gostry Centre from the scheme was actually taken some 2 years ago by the Brightwell Steering Committee as necessary to make the funding of the scheme viable. This is recorded in the committee minutes. I was not a councillor at the time, but I objected to the decision and spoke against it as the chairman of the Farnham Society Planning Committee when it was decided by the executive and full council to move the Gostry Centre to the Memorial Hall. I also objected to and spoke against the non-material amendment application to the building where the new Gostry Centre was and still is planned to go, as making the operations of the Gostry Centre unviable. Moving on to when I became a councillor, in the first council meeting I again made it clear my position when I proposed an amendment that Crest Nicholson pay for the additional $700,000 necessary to move the Gosford Centre to the Memorial Hall, taking the total cost to £2.3 million. I also opposed as a councillor the planning application which came before this committee to take over part of the existing hall and build an extension to house the new Gosford Centre. So all in all, Mr Chairman, I think I have predetermined this decision as much as it is impossible to predetermine any decision. But in the interest of the committee and the council not being at risk of finding of maladministration, I feel obliged to point out that most other members of this committee are in exactly the same position. The council has disrespected this committee by taking the decision out of its hands. There is now no decision to take. It has been predetermined by all of the meetings that I referred to earlier. Can anyone here who supports...
Can I suggest, Councillor McLeod, you're straying completely away from your reason for declaring an interest. You have obviously reasons. You've declared those reasons. You're now making a statement as if you were actually a member of the committee, which you're now withdrawing to be.
No, I'm talking about procedure, Mr Chairman. I'm talking about...
You're also condemning all of us as members, which
I
think is unfair. So should we have a debate as to whether we accept your declarations that we're all predetermining?
I'm not condemning anyone, Mr Chairman, at all. I respect your decision and your position. I'm just pointing out that everyone here has got, and the same as me, they've got a predetermined position on the issue because they have already decided. There's no decision to take this evening. And I finally state, I was going to say it.
Point of order, Chairman, this is not for discussion at this meeting, and I take great exception to being accused of being predetermined on this application.
That's my opinion.
I think the member should withdraw. Thank you.
Yes, we recognise that it's your opinion.
Yeah.
You've said it now. We don't agree with it, or many members, I'm pretty sure all of our members will not agree with that statement. So if you could now withdraw so we can continue with the meeting, that would be greatly appreciated.
I'm happy to do that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
I will say finally, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence in allowing me to make a fairly full explanation.
You've certainly achieved that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, please.
Mr. Fraser.
I do support Councillor MacLeod's position, and I think we could ask, with your indulgence, for officers of democratic services to explain the distinction between predetermined in a negative way and being predetermined in a positive way, why one should withdraw and the other not.
We're on the item of agenda of declarations of interest. We're not in a debate. Never to continue. Yes.
It's up to a member what position they declare, but I just wish to declare a non-pecuniary interest as a member of Farnham Town Council, the same as Councillor Frost.
So if that concludes the declarations of interest, can we go on to item 4, questions from members of the public?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So we now move to item 5, which is a nice long piece to read out for you. Item A1, WA 2016-0268, land at East Street, Farnham. The amended description on your update sheets, application under section 73 of the variation of condition 3 plans and removal of condition 61 sustainability statement and condition 60 combined heat and power scheme of WA 2012-0912 East Street redevelopment to allow 106 square metres increase in the size of the extension to Brightwell House, realignment of the rear of building D21, removal of the Gosford Centre and community use from building D20, resulting in space to be occupied by use class A1 or A3, retail, food and drink, internal alterations and amendment to landscaping scheme, revision to heating strategy, omitting energy centre and changes to comply with current building regulation and other regulation requirements with subsequent revisions to sustainability statement, amendment to affordable housing provision to provide 100% shared ownership flats. This application is accompanied by an addendum to the environmental statement as amplified by emails and plans received 21st of 3rd 2016 and 0106 2016 in relation to flood risk and as amended by email and viability information received on the 6th of the 5th, 2016 in relation to the proposed affordable housing mix. So, Louise, can we now move on to the... Sorry, Elizabeth, if you wish to make an opening statement, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, by way of introduction, I would just like to make a few key important points to assist your assessment of this important application. I will then pass over to Louise Yandell, who will take members through the detail of the scheme and the determining issues. Firstly, most members, I'm sure, will be familiar with this site. The East Street Farnham redevelopment site has had a long planning history, as set out in the officer's report, culminating in the grant of planning permission in 2009 for, in summary, a mixed-use development of retail, cinema and residential uses, the relocation of the Gostrey Centre and all associated works. This permission was effectively renewed in 2012 by a further grant of permission, and importantly, that permission has been implemented by a material start on site, the demolition of the former tennis pavilion. This means, of course, that the permission can be built out at any time and is extant in perpetuity. The principle of this redevelopment has been, therefore, established by the extant permission. And most aspects of the plans before the committee this evening have already got planning permission and are not changing and cannot reasonably, I would advise, be re-evaluated this evening. Louise will be pointing out the changes that are proposed in comparison with the approved development. Secondly, the current application has been submitted under Section 73 of the Town and Country Planning Act. You'll be aware this section is a long-standing legal provision to enable applicants to seek variations to an existing permission by way of variations to conditions on an original consent. Successive governments have recognised that many permitted developments through the construction process or over time often require relatively minor refinement as implementation takes place. And since 2009, the government has indicated that minor material amendments can be dealt with by way of Section 73 and plan variations in order to assist the speedy delivery of development. So there's nothing usual about the use of Section 73 to seek to modify existing conditions. However, as members will be aware, the Planning Authority does have to have regard to any material changes in circumstances, and there has to be planning justification for the changes to deviate from the original scheme. The third point to make is that the original permission was subject, as you'll be aware, to environmental impact assessment. Appropriately, the current Section 73 application has been subject to an addendum to assess whether the proposed changes, in combination with the approved development, would have a significant environmental effect. So taking into account expert advice, the conclusions are from the officers that the scheme, subject to mitigation, would not have any significant environmental effects. Fourthly, members will note, in addition to the proposed changes to the planning permission, there are changes proposed to the Section 106 agreement. And one key change that I wanted to highlight for you is the proposed change to the affordable housing mix. The original Section 106 agreement, you may recall, required a mix of tenures, and the planning permission provided for 50% shared ownership and 50% affordable rent. Having regard to the viability and deliverability of the scheme, the applicant now proposes to change the type of affordable housing to 100% shared ownership. So this remains clearly affordable housing, but is a different type of affordable housing. But the overall percentage of housing upon the site will remain 30% affordable housing. Now, consistent with normal practice, officers have sought expert advice on the viability information submitted to support the applicant's case, and our conclusions, as you'll see in the report, taking into account the view of the expert opinion, are set out. And the experts conclude that 100% shared ownership tenure position would make the scheme more viable, and the applicant's case is justified on viability grounds. Now, members will see that the report from the independent assessors is contained in an exempt annex, as it does contain commercially sensitive detail. This isn't unusual. Members will recall this is completely consistent with normal practice. For example, when you dealt with the Godalming Quay site, it was exactly the same situation. If members wish to discuss the content of the exempt annex, clearly that we would need to move into confidential session. However, the critical content is set out in the public part of the agenda, and it is hoped that this will be sufficient, bearing in mind you will have read the exempt annex as background information, to support your debate in public this evening. A final point, Chairman, is that members' most recent experience of this site is clearly likely to have been through discussions on the landowning side at the recent Brightwells Council meeting. Clearly tonight your consideration will be entirely as local planning authority, and matters in relation to the landowning side, of course, are not material to your assessment. I appreciate members are aware of that, but I just wanted to reiterate that important point. And this, of course, is consistent with the transparent approach that the committee has taken in relation to other applications on this site over the last 8 years. So I trust that background is helpful to the committee. Chairman, I'm now going to pass over to Louise to take members through the detail of the application and the determining issues. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can draw members' attention to the printed sheets you've got in front of you. If you can turn firstly to the 4th slide on the first page. This shows the site location plan. The site is located on the south-eastern side of East Street and also adjoins the western side of Dogflood Way. If you can turn now to the aerial photo, which shows the existing site, which is currently covered by car parking, tennis courts, green space and a number of buildings, which include Brightwells House, a Grade 2 listed building, and the Gostry Centre, which is currently in community use. Turning to the first slide of photos, the first photo on the top left is taken from Dogflood Way, which is to the west of the site, to the east of the site. Existing offices and residential units are located to the right of this photo, and in the background, if you can see it from the small image, Brightwell House is visible. The second photo is taken from within the centre of the site, looking towards the Gostry Centre, which is to the north. And the final photo is taken from East Street, looking towards the northern boundary of the site. If members could turn the page. On the second slide of photos, the first photo is taken from within the centre of the site, looking towards the west with the existing Sainsbury's car park in the background. The second photo is taken again from the centre of the site, looking north towards Brightwells. And the final photo is taken within the existing leisure centre car park, which is to the south-east of the site. As members are aware, planning permission has previously been granted for a mixed-use development comprising 9,814 square metres of retail, restaurant and cafe bar accommodation, including the change of use of Brightwell House and Marlborough Head, 239 residential units, a multi-screen cinema, multi-storey surface and basement car parking providing a total of 426 spaces, associated highway and access works, provision of infrastructure and landscaping, replacement facility for the existing Gostry Centre, and the demolition and clearance of the site. This current application before you this evening seeks minor material amendments to the approved scheme. These include an increase in the footprint of the extension at Brightwell House, the removal of a stair and lift access from the residential car park into Brightwell Park, the realignment of building D21, the replacement of the community use with the commercial use, the removal of the combined heat and power, alterations to internal layouts due to service layouts, alterations to fenestration, and amendments to the affordable housing mix to provide 100% shared ownership. You're looking at the master plan ground floor, which is the top right slide on the second page. Access into the site would remain as previously approved, including the access from Dogflood Way. At present, there is an existing change in land levels between the current access and the land level outside the leisure centre, and full details of the proposed levels will be secured by condition 5. If I can turn you to the middle slide on the left-hand side, which is building D4. Building D4 is located in the south-eastern corner of the site, where the existing leisure centre car park is currently located, and this would provide parking in the basement, restaurant and residential uses at ground floor, and residential on the first, second and third floors. That slide shows a comparison between the current application and the extant permission. The bulk and mass of the building would remain as in the extant permission, and the amendments to this particular building include the addition of chimneys and flues, amendments to fenestration, and amendments to the internal layout to add service risers. If I can turn you to the fourth slide, this shows a comparison between the current application and the extant scheme, where you can see the flue details on the roof of this building. On the fifth slide, shows an amendment to a proposed chimney position on the left of that slide, and on the right of that slide shows an amendment to the proposed window layout. This has resulted from internal layout changes to the flats internally. The final slide on this page shows an amended roof design, and this shows the positioning of the flues and the enlarged and repositioned chimney. If members could turn the page to page 3. Building D8 is proposed to be located in the north-eastern corner of the site, adjacent to Dogflood Way. This would be a 4-storey building that would provide parking and servicing in the basement, parking, commercial uses and residential at ground floor, and a cinema, residential uses and parking on the first, second and third floors. The first slide on this page shows a comparison between the current application and the extant permission. Again, the bulk and mass of the building would remain as in the extant permission, with the exception of a small change to the lift shaft. The amendments to this building also include fenestration changes, changes to the core to suit the service strategy, and the installation of flues. The combined heat and power centre would also be removed from this building. The second slide on this page shows the basement level, which is very difficult to see given the size of the slide, but the energy centre on the bottom layout would be removed, and this would be replaced with a service riser. The car parking layout would be reconfigured as a result, but the same number of car parking spaces would be provided. The third slide on this page shows the amendment to the building as a result of the service changes in the access area. And the fourth slide on this page shows the amendment to, again, the building as a result of the service changes and includes the flues on the roof. Building D15, which is on the fourth slide, this is located on the site of the existing Gostry Centre. This would be a 3-storey residential building. The amendments on this slide show the addition of flues and the replacement of a ground floor window with an escape door. The fifth slide on this page shows the additional flues in comparison to the extant permission. Building D6 would be a part 3-storey, part 4-storey building that would front East Street, which is to the north of the site. This building would provide commercial units at ground floor, commercial units and residential at first floor, and residential on the second and third floors. This slide again shows a comparison between the current application and the extant permission. The bulk and mass of the building would remain as in the extant permission. The amendments to this particular building include changes to the layout to allow service risers and an escape staircase, and the amendment of 2 one-bedroom flats to be replaced by 2 two-bedroom flats, along with amendments to the fenestration and additional flues. If members could turn to page 4 of the slideshow. This first slide on this page shows the additional flues on the roof in relation to the extant permission. And the second slide shows the amendment on the first floor to the internal layout, which include changes to the access core, the addition of service risers, and the amendment from a 1 to a 2-bedroom flat, and that is repeated also on the second floor. Building D14 is proposed to be a part 3-storey building that would also front East Street to the north of the site and would be opposite building D6. This building would be retail on all floors. Additional flues would be added to this building, and that is shown zoomed in on slide 4 on that page. Building D1 would adjoin D14 in the northeastern corner of the site. This would be a 3-storey building that would have retail at ground floor and residential on the first and second floors. Amendments to this particular building include additional flues and chimneys and the addition of a service riser. The final slide on this page shows the additional chimney and the change in footprint to provide the service risers. And the first slide on the next page also shows the slight change in footprint to detail the service risers. Building D21 would be located on the southwestern boundary of the site, adjacent to the existing Sainsbury's. This building would be a 2-storey commercial building. Amendments to this particular building include the reduction in width of the building to bring the building away from the boundary. The third slide on this page shows the slight reduction in footprint to bring the building away from the boundary. Building D20 is located in the southeastern corner of the site. This is on the location of the existing tennis courts. This building is a Part 4, Part 5-storey building that would be commercial at ground floor with residential above. The amendments to this building include the removal of the community use at ground floor and first floor and its replacement with commercial, along with alterations to the fenestration and the addition of flues. The fourth slide shows the southern elevation and the fifth slide shows the eastern elevation. The height of this building would not be amended from the extant scheme. The final slide on this page shows the fenestration layout, which has resulted from the internal flat changes, which has resulted in some of the windows becoming larger and some smaller. If members could turn to page 6. The first slide on this page shows the detail. The bottom layout shows the existing community use that was originally proposed as part of the stamp permission. The top layout shows the commercial unit, which is now proposed as this proposed application. Building D12 is located in the centre of the site and is the Grade 2 listed Brightwell House. Amendments to this particular building would include the increase in the size of the ground floor extension, which is under part of the proposed canopy, which was included as part of the extant scheme, along with an increase in the size of the first floor extensions. The plans and elevations show the small increase in footprint of the building at ground floor and also at first floor level. The Council's Heritage Officer has confirmed that the harm to the listed building as a result of the changes would be less than substantial. This less than substantial harm would be outweighed by the benefits of the scheme, which include the provision of a sustainable long-term future for Brightwell House and the economic and social benefits to the residents of Waverley from the overall scheme. Members should also take into consideration the removal of the unsympathetic existing extension which currently exists on Brightwell House, which is a further benefit of the scheme. On the fifth slide on this page is an image of Brightwell Park. On the extant permission, there was a proposed stair and lift access which exited from basement level of one of the residential buildings into the park itself. This is proposed to be removed from the scheme, and residents would instead be able to access the park from the ground floor of the building. A cycle route would be secured with Surrey County Council Highways Authority as part of Condition 50, and full details of this would be required to be included as part of a landscaping condition. With regards to affordable housing, this scheme proposes an amendment to the affordable housing mix, which was originally proposed to be 50% affordable rented and 50% shared ownership. The applicants have demonstrated that it would not be viable to provide this affordable housing mix, and as such, 100% shared ownership is provided. The viability information submitted has been independently assessed by the Council's viability consultants, who have concluded that it would not be viable to provide any social rented housing, and the scheme would be more viable with 100% shared ownership. With regards to infrastructure contributions, as a result of legislative changes since the approval of the extant permission, the infrastructure contributions have been reassessed to ensure they are still relevant. The majority of the contributions have remained the same, with the exception of the education contributions, which are £1,332 lower than that originally sought. In order to ensure the loss of the community use on site is considered acceptable, a further contribution of £800,000 has been sought towards community facilities at the Memorial Hall. With regards to sustainability, the applicants have proposed to remove the combined heat and power system from the scheme. The Council no longer have policies to require certain renewables to be incorporated into developments, and as such it would no longer be reasonable to require this from the developer. Notwithstanding this, the applicants have demonstrated that the proposal would have a 6% reduction in carbon emissions over that of the consented scheme. This has been achieved using advanced building materials and products being available. The legal agreement, which is required to tie the previous relevant permissions to this scheme, is currently being drafted. This legal agreement will also incorporate the changes to the education contributions, the additional community centre contributions, and will remove references to the combined heat and power and on-site community uses. If I could please draw members' attention to the update sheet, which details an amendment to the description, a change to the housing mix, an amendment to the location of the Memorial Hall, which was incorrect in the report, further justification for all the financial contributions, and details additional representations. It also outlines amendments to conditions 2 and 63. I would also like to provide members with an oral update. Condition 4 on page 67 of the agenda, condition 13 on page 70, and conditions 48 and 51 on page 83 of the agenda all refer to phasing, which should be secured in condition 2. These should all be amended to refer to condition 1. And finally, the matters of principal and technical opinion from this evening are the open space and recreation, retail provision, housing land supply, housing mix, affordable housing, leisure and community uses, highways and parking issues, crime and disorder, financial considerations and infrastructure contributions, climate change and sustainability, biodiversity and the effect on the SPAs, archaeology, air quality, noise, flooding and drainage, contaminated land, accessibility and equalities, and the environmental impact regulations. The matters for members' judgment this evening are the impact on visual amenity, heritage, the impact on residential amenity, and the standards of accommodation and provision of amenity space. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Louise. I have to say well done in dealing with it in such a way without having it all on the screen for you. So you perform well, although it's not as good as it would have been, of course, with it on the screen. So we now move on to public speaking, and the first person to speak, invited to speak, is Jerry Hyman. Mr. Hyman, would you like to come forward? And you have 4 minutes. You've done this many times before, so I'm sure you understand the rules.
Is that working? Can you hear me clear enough there? Thank you very much indeed. Good evening, Chairman, members. I'm afraid that Crest have messed up here. The description of the application, which you're asked to consent, is, as you can read from your documents, application under Section 73 for the variation of Condition 3 plans and Condition 61 sustainability statement, and removal of Condition 60, the combined heat and power scheme. However, if you looked at it carefully, the Office of Report is actually asking you to agree to do the opposite. If we can address these 3 issues separately, first, requested variation of Condition 3, the plans list. That condition requires that the development is built according to the approved plans listed. There's a problem in that. Firstly, the new master plan, which Crest are asking you to approve, has got the wrong dog foot access arrangement. It shows a 2008 plan which was scrapped because it's too close to the leisure centre entrance. We can't revert to that. You should not consent the new master plan. Also, the new master plan still shows the main footpath cycleway going through the Bat House. The application supporting statement says that the plan of the new route is here in the documents, but it isn't. It's missing. Although that was going to be put under a condition, the officers are recommending you put it under a condition. It shouldn't be, because condition 50 in the back of your papers confirms that Surrey's agreements to the route of the path and getting it legally defined is a precondition of commencement. That has not been discharged. It's not just a landscaping issue. We don't know what sacrifices might be necessary, and you can't assess the likely impacts, perhaps on Home Park House residents, trees, whatever the new route of the path might be. Crest have had a year to solve this, and still there's no acceptable solution, no plan. You shouldn't consent, it's blind. The EIA regs, in fact, require that you know the impact, so you must refuse consent by law. And a third problem with the master plan is that it also contradicts the proposed levels and contours plan, that's MPO 24. It doesn't address the need for an access ramp for the new car park. It proposes a 64-metre land level at the amphitheatre, which contradicts an Environment Agency condition requiring that it be 62.5 metres. That's to do with flood compensation. So you cannot consent contradictory plans. You cannot contradict the Environment Agency's requirement. Ergo, you cannot consent the new master plan. So that's three solid reasons, members, why you can't approve the new master plan, and that means you can't vary condition 3, the list of plans as requested. Crikey. Moving on to the application's vary condition 61, this is a sustainability statement. Oddly, the officer report's asking for its complete removal, not just variation. So what you're being asked to agree is different from what the application seeks and different to what's been consulted upon. The condition says the development must not be constructed other than in accordance with the sustainability statement and its associated annexes unless otherwise agreed in writing by the planning authority. That does not need removing or varying in any way. The problem is that what officers are doing without you knowing is removing lots and lots of conditions. Of the original 73 conditions, only 34 have been addressed correctly. 39 of the conditions have been changed wrongly. It took us 5 hours to go through this. Some removed without being fully discharged, some altered without any justification for doing so, and a few genuine errors and typos, of course. It's a mess. The Section 73 application procedure does not allow you to remove conditions without an application for them and public consultation, unless, of course, they've been discharged. Thank you. The condition requiring that you remove the sustainability statement does not need removing. So that one's wrong. It's the opposite of what you're being asked to do. The third is removal of CHP. Well, what that says is if the CHP plant is removed, it must be replaced with an alternative renewable energy technology or low carbon technology that achieves at least a 227-tonne saving. You don't need to remove that. There's no reason for that. Therefore, if I can wind up, please, you're being asked to consent the opposite to what the application says. Hence, we respectfully request that you refuse consent. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hyman. We now call on Farnham Town Council representative, Councillor Kiki Murraylees. Can you switch on the microphone, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
The Town Council is seriously concerned about the impact this application will have on Farnham. While some of the amendments individually would appear to be minor, when taken all together they are substantial. The Gostry Centre is not in the approved scheme as part of a condition, so it is unclear as to what condition is being varied in order to effect its removal. But that aside, its removal constitutes a huge saving for the developer and a costly one for Farnham residents. Waverley are now stumping up approximately 2.2 million for the privilege of moving it to the Memorial Hall, and the developers are only looking to provide approximately a third of the monies when they had agreed to supply the entire facility at a cost to themselves. This, remember, was a major factor in their being awarded the contract over other developers. The space released by allowing them to do this also substantially benefits Crest Nicholson financially. With regard to Brightwell's house, the extension of 160 square metres, i.e. 13% increase in floor space, cannot be considered a minor amendment, and the revised heating strategy and the omission of alternative stairs and lift access to the residential car park leaves us questioning whether the principal motives behind them are yet more cost-saving measures to dig the developer out of a hole. More importantly, the accumulative financial effect of these changes is a contribution to changing the economic balance of the scheme in favour of the developer and against the financial interests of the council. The property has not been on the market since 2002. It is our belief, which is shared by Waverley Borough Council's independent valuers, that there would be interest in the site by other developers and that such competitive bidding may well result in the assessed value being exceeded. We are being asked to approve changes to the scheme where there is no complete master plan or drawing. There is no complete up-to-date environmental statement for the whole Brightwells project, and in particular, the transport assessment covering the proposed reconfiguration of the Royal Deer Junction. The present assessment does not include the in-combination effects of the railway level crossing and changes to the layout and traffic phases, nor the increase in traffic flow since the initial assessment was carried out. The EIA regulations require that this be completed before consent is granted. We are also dismayed that there are many other points of objections that are listed in the report that have been ignored. For example, the failure to provide any drawings for the revised footpath/cycleway showing the proposed changes to the route and landscaping. There are also some significant objections that have not even been listed, as in the configuration of the dog flood way access, which currently shows a 2-metre land level difference from the level at the sports centre. We therefore submit this application be refused. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I can now call on Mr. Bruce McCarthy.
Thank you. Good evening. It's nice to be sat in front of you again. We are, despite what Mr. Hyman says, still very excited about the delivery of this scheme. We have done our material start and references to the ex-ante condition or consents. It is our opinion that the changes that we're seeking tonight are actually envisaged by the original planning consent. 60 and 61 talks about the if we're not doing a CHP, then we need to demonstrate the carbon savings, which we have done in the material that we've submitted. And then in respect of social housing, the proposal that we put to you just a month ago was aligned with that, and we believe it's the appropriate course of action for this scheme. In terms of energy generally, there's been a growing focus in the market on improved energy efficiency, which has resulted in wider range of advanced performance materials and products. The previous strategy is no longer considered the optimal position in sustainability terms. I think Crest alone have removed 4 CHP systems from schemes. Customers do not like them. It typically results in higher service charges, a mismatch of performance. The scaling and building up of these things is difficult to achieve. So we are, along with the whole of the general policy, going for fabric first. It's far better to be saving energy than just generating it in a different way and distributing it. The Danes seem to be able to do it. I don't know how, but their tax structure seems to be completely different to ours. And my wife is Danish, and we have this discussion every time I'm there. Overall, the revised strategy presents a stronger and more robust approach to delivering low carbon and sustainable development, and the visual impact will be minimal. In respect of the affordable housing, we've shown that it's 100% shared ownership. At the moment, the market is all about providing homes for young people who would otherwise not be able to afford them. Shared ownership is just another mechanism, along with Help to Buy and Bank of Mum and Dad, that can facilitate this. And we believe it's the right approach for this scheme, it is also something that our affordable occupier would like to progress. In terms of the extension to Brightwell's house, it is small. I believe it is in the region of 12.5% to the current extension. It brings into the scheme Carluccio's, an Italian deli operation, which I'm sure councillors will agree is the type of operator that we want to attract into this scheme. It also safeguards Brightwell's house, because they have said, and other operators have said, that the proposed extension at the rear was not large enough for a viable operation. It's essential that we achieve those changes, and it also will enhance the lettability of the second unit. In respect of the Memorial Hall, I would just like to add that, or clarify, the reference to £800,000. That is the payment that we offered under the land transaction a month ago, and is not an additional £800,000 on planning terms. And I think that just needs to be clarified this evening. Otherwise, we believe that the amendments are minor in nature and supported by the environmental and viability information provided. The scheme continues to deliver much needed housing and includes shared ownership, employment and a revitalised town centre. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. MacArthur. Now, members, open to you to debate the proposal. Councillor Patalis.
Thank you. Actually, it's just a question, if I may, please. And it has actually been referred to by Mr. Hyman and also by the town council representative. And it was something that rather jumped out at me when I was looking at the information. And that's on page 21. And it's the objections from Farnham Town Council. I always pay a lot of attention to what town and parish councils say, because really they are living within the area. And forgive me if it's here somewhere, but bullet point number 4, which refers to the changes to the footpath and the cycleway access, I haven't been able to establish that what is required is actually appears to be available to us. This is with regard to Bat House. I wonder if I could have an answer to that question, which was also raised. Thank you.
Thank you. The layout, the external layout for the landscaping is just indicative on the master plan. Full details of the proposed landscaping would be secured by a condition prior to each phase of the development, which would incorporate the cycle route through the site. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to make a statement? Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Chairman. Tonight we have one last chance to pull back from the embarrassment of building a white elephant. Despite investing a wealth of time, energy and political pride involving devious manipulations of planning regulations, multiple non-material changes and additions, and waiving many conditions precedent, all in order to transform the proposal and enhance its profitability for Crest Nicholson Sainsbury, the scheme still remains a potential white elephant. This ill-starred design has not improved with age and numerous alterations. After 12 years of gestation, we may be about to witness the birth of an anachronism. Amongst a host of design inadequacies, I cite but a few. The master plan for the scheme contradicts the proposed levels and contours plan, and both are in conflict with the flood compensation condition. In this regard, it is worth noting that the design maximum flood level is 1 metre lower than the highest recorded flood level on the River Wey. There may be a rational explanation for this disparity, but I cannot find it. The underground car park will impede the natural flow of groundwater towards the river. Is the impediment serious? What effect might any change in flow have upon surrounding properties? Nobody has seen fit to prepare an authoritative report on this aspect. Are we to simply suck it and see? The cumulative deterioration in Farnham's air quality and the impact of alterations in the traffic flow have not been modelled or assessed. Indeed, we are told that these vital exercises will be undertaken once construction has commenced. The cart is well before the horse on these two issues. There is reportedly a reversion of the approved dog flood access plan to the old 2008 version. This may not accord with the new master plan, but nobody appears to be bothering with an impact assessment. Again, a case of suck it and see. Plans for footway and cycle routes have been spoken about, but nobody has taken the trouble to draw them on the documents, thus preventing any assessment. There has been no attempt to update and replace the inappropriate 2009-13 Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area Avoidance Strategy, and an appropriate assessment is called for by the Habitats Regulations. Those of you who serve on the Western Area Planning Committee will know how keen I am to keep up to date with the continuing saga. I could go on, but a definitive list would be endless. The above deficiencies prove, if proof were needed, that the design process has been poor, at times chaotic, and it remains incomplete. The counterpart planning process has failed to keep pace, failed to insist that errors of commission and omission are corrected, but has simply pressed on regardless. This is a symptom of the unhealthy, even incestuous relationship that exists between owners, promoters and adjudicators on this project. Surrey County Council has stepped in where no investment house or financier has dared to tread for all of these 12 years. In so doing, they have beggared the county budget to save Waverley's bacon. The first sacrifice has been our precious Meals on Wheels service for the frail and elderly, and more economies will follow. For so long, Farnham has suffered the dereliction of the Grade 2 Brightwell's house and garden, and the abandonment of our Redgrave Theatre, sabotaged by Waverley-appointed managers, few of whom seem to know how about running a provincial theatre. Farnham lost the Bowls Club. The tennis club was banished to a contaminated site half-mile downstream. The health centre was banished a mile to the east, and now the Gospey Centre is to be banished a mile to the west. We lost our Art Deco cinema to Friends Provident, and now we are to lose the most popular pub in town to a compulsory purchase order. I hate to stop the councillor in full flow, but we are supposed to be addressing the application we have in front of us. This isn't. I will return to it.
I agree with you, but I allowed him to continue on
the
basis that he hang up. But I would wish you to wind up now, please. You did say just a little while ago that you had concluded your list, or you weren't going to complete a list, and therefore can we now move on to other speakers?
Can I then jump a piece here, which you might think is diverting? I would like to move an amended recommendation as follows.
Right, thank you.
The permission be refused on the grounds that the master plan is errant, incomplete and clearly contradicts approved plans which are being retained, including the Environment Agency flood compensation requirements in MP 024, so the variation of condition 3 list of plans must be refused. B. There is no need or justification for the removal of condition 61, the combined heat and power, or for the variation of condition 60, sustainability statement. C. There is no technical summary for the whole of the Brightwell Riverside project. D. In the absence of full and accurate plans and obligatory assessments, The cumulative impacts of these proposals in combination with the rest of the project cannot be identified and so cannot be considered or consented. Lastly, E, there is no application or justification for the removal and changes of numerous conditions as is being requested. Do I have, please? I know that many of you here are disposed for support of this development, but may I ask, is there someone kind enough to second this motion?
Thank you, Mr. Fraser. You actually beat me to it in asking whether you had provided the information that you just read out to anybody else to second your amendment to the recommendation.
I have a copy here, but they've surely all been listening. Is no one...
Is there anybody here who would wish to second Mr. Fraser's amendment?
Are you also obedient to your Tory whips?
I'm sorry, Mr. Fraser, your proposed amendment falls because there's no seconder and therefore we are not even allowed to go to a vote. But thank you very much.
Would you allow me to continue with my text?
I would have thought at that point you've concluded. You've proposed an amendment and that hasn't worked. So if you would like to wait, and we will ask other speakers to come forward, and you may wish to return at some point later in the discussion. Members, are there anybody else wishing to speak now? Yes, sir.
Chairman, this is in my ward, and I'm just going to say that whilst there are many of them, we are really only considering minor material amendments, which are inevitable given the passage of time and the changes to the heat and light, which have been well justified to us this evening, I think. This is an important regeneration project for the east side of Farnham Centre, and I think it brings significant benefit to Farnham and significant benefit to the people of Farnham. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My voting record indicates that I've always supported Brightwell so far, and I hope to continue to do so. But I'm concerned that over the time we've been attending meetings relating to Brightwells, that some pretty heavyweight language has been used, and we've been charged with being anything from naive to corrupt and everything in between. What I would ask the officers for is absolute reassurance that of the points that have been made relating specifically to the lack of a master plan, the environmental statement, and the, forgive me, is it a non-technical summary or a technical summary? But those three things in particular, can I have your assurance that this does not expose us to risk of subsequent blowback if we do approve tonight's recommendation? Thank you.
Officers, would you like to respond?
Chairman, in summary, I would just go back to the points I made at the beginning of the meeting. You have granted planning permission for this scheme. It is extant. It can be built out. You are considering a number of changes which we recommend to you do constitute minor material amendments in the context of the overall scheme. We are satisfied, having looked at the technical information that's been submitted, consulted our experts, that the scheme is acceptable and does not have a greater environmental impact, taking into account the impact of the existing scheme. And your particular point about conditions and the non-technical summary, there are a number of conditions being varied, but for the reasons we set out in the report, we think that the applicant's case is justified, and we think that the process that's been gone through is sound, and we would happily recommend to you that this would be a valid planning permission if you were to grant it. And I think Louise wants to pick up on one particular point. Thank you.
Yeah, just with regard to the non-technical summary, whilst there wasn't a non-technical summary issued with this particular application, there was one for the original environmental statement, and the addendum which was submitted with this application is in summary form, and that's almost copied verbatim in the report on pages 60 and 61 of your agenda. Thank you.
Thank Thank you very much. Councillor Hess, you content with that?
I suspect I ought to bow to the experts. I just would comment that because it's been such a sensitive area and the environmental impact assessment comes up again and again and again, when is somebody going to address this and get us out of what seems to be a perpetual hole? Does anyone have any idea of when we might expect this to be done? Because it doesn't sit easily that the report will be published after construction has begun. That doesn't sound right at all.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to speak? Nobody else needs to come back.
Chairman, if I could just ask Councillor Hess just to confirm, what is it that you're referring to that will be submitted? Is it something subject to a condition that's going to be submitted as part of reserved matters, as a discharge of condition? Just wanted to clarify the question raised.
I'm really not quite sure, but I am aware that this environmental issues we keep being hit with this brickbat. There never seems to be a definitive answer in the shape of a formal report. If I should know that there's a publication date has been published, I'm afraid I'm ignorant of it. Do we know when it will be? What is the plan to get this base covered?
Chairman, I think I understand the question. Just to be absolutely clear, the original planning permission had an environmental statement, very big document. At the time, we went through that with members in great detail. When the permission came up for renewal in 2012, it was subject to an addendum whereby the applicant had to review all the environmental issues. I don't think they particularly wanted to, but we made them because we wanted them to get a valid permission if it were to be granted. So they had to do all that work again, review all the relevant environmental areas. And indeed, now in relation to this application, they have submitted a further addendum to bring the environmental impact assessment up to date. And that is summarised in your report. And the conclusions we've reached is that there would be no greater environmental impact taking into account these minor amendments. So I hope that's made the point clearer. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear in our original presentation. Thank you, Chairman.
Indeed, thank you very much. So, in other words, the environmental concerns that have been raised tonight, both by Councillor Fraser and by the members of the public, are, what word should I, they have been definitively addressed. Is that correct, please?
Yes. Chairman, in our view, we have received the correct information from the applicant as they're required to do under the regulations to enable us to assess the likely impacts. We have assessed them, we've taken the expert opinion in the relevant areas, and we've come to the conclusion that, and we're recommending to you as the committee, that the conclusion from that information is there will be no environmental impacts that cannot be mitigated, and that is seeing through the process in its entirety properly. And I think you can have confidence personally in that recommendation, that it is complete and it is properly put forward. I don't know whether Barry, as a lawyer, you want to add to anything there, but I'll try to make it as clear.
Mr. Chairman, just to try and clarify the position on environmental impact assessment. I mean, there is no absolutely defined bar to be crossed or achieved. There's a lot of case law on this. And I think it's really sort of concludes with two key cases, which one of which says it's for the LPA, so the local planning authority, to decide, in listening to its officers, has there been sufficient information set out and comprised in the environmental statement for it to be satisfied that a proper environmental assessment has been carried out. And indeed, there's one case, Jones Manfield District Council. It says that environmental impact assessment is not intended to be a paper chase. It's not intended to be an obstacle course to trip up local planning authorities. It's intended to be a tool to assess whether there are any significant environmental impacts which would militate against the granting of the planning consent. And indeed, that case says the decision is a matter for your judgment, listening to your officers, that there's been sufficient information, and the local planning authority does not have to require that all uncertainties have been resolved, or that it has to be satisfied that comprehensive assessment has been carried out. And I think you've heard this evening that indeed that has happened, and there is a sufficiency of information contained in the environmental statement which really does address this issue, and I think you can rely safely on the advice of your officers.
Could I?
You wish to come back again?
If I may, please. I'd just say thank you. That's a definitive statement, and I'm extremely grateful to you.
Thank you.
I adduce, therefore, that we are not the appropriate body to address environmental concerns to, and therefore people who do wish to follow up the environmental thing need to address another body. Would that be correct? Okay.
We are the Constitutional Authority Council.
All right, all right.
Yes.
Right.
The point I was trying to make was that it's not intended to be such a technical process that local planning authorities can be tripped up with technicalities. They have to have an adequate environmental statement in front of them. That's been developed, checked over time. There's an addendum. There's clearly, in our view as officers, a sufficiency of information before you to make the judgment whether or not there's a significant adverse environmental impact by reason of this development. And that's simply that. You cannot be, I think, in my view, successfully judicially reviewed if you have heard that from your officers and you're satisfied on their verbal advice and on the papers before you that the environmental statement contains that sufficiency.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think we need to be very careful that we're not there's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on, and every time the word East Street regeneration is mentioned, the Deer Junction comes up, environmental statements come up, and if we're not careful, we're going to get very hooked on those because they're constantly being brought to our attention. I am satisfied that the officers have done all they can with a very complex planning application, and I would be grateful if the members of the public sitting there would actually let members speak without comment. I think my colleague here, Councillor Hill, put it very succinctly. I sat in this chamber when we were debating the lovely development that we have now near Waitrose. And I can remember a particular group who are opposing this, opposing that, and now it's got awards and it's wonderful. They think it's wonderful too. So I think that I'm sorry, could that person be removed? You know, we are in...
Members of the public, would you please listen to the debate, but you are not in a position to comment, and Councillor Frost is making her comments, which she believes is
Thank you
correct.
very much, Chairman. That's very kind of you. The officer went through very carefully what would have been the slides. And if you had listened very carefully, I don't think that the majority of the changes that are being required are of a major nature. One of them is, and that is the removal of the Gostry Centre. But the Gostry Centre are welcoming their new abode. And when we first talked about this, I was, in fact, the portfolio holder for housing and deputy leader. And when we first talked about the Gostry Centre there, we looked at other opportunities within the town to relocate them. There were none. Therefore, we tried to make the best of what we had on this site. Since then, something has come up where they're going to have a purpose-built centre. And I think that's fantastic. You know, that we're actually looking at a centre of excellence for the older people in our community. And I don't think there's a problem there. But I think if we, perhaps the officer might like to go through them again. But we've got a chimney stack here and a bigger window there. And I really don't think that this is the things that we have in front of us are, in fact, major. We are not here to re-debate the whole planning application, which my colleague, who is the substitute tonight, seems to think we are. We're not. We're here to look at these amendments that the developers want to the scheme. I represent a lot of people in the town, and quite frankly, the number opposed to it is far less than those that say, for God's sake, get on with it. Let's have that done. Let's finish this whole debate and get on with it. But we have groups of people who are continually trying to find reasons why it shouldn't happen. And they're the same reasons that they made all those years ago. So please, let's get on with it. And let's give the people of Farnham a very nice new regeneration area.
Thank you very much, Councillor Frost. Well, Councillor Ellis, you have something pertinent to add.
Perhaps I can just speak in support of Mrs. Frost, Chairman. I do remember many, many years ago sitting in this chamber when we did debate in the early stages, East Street, Brightwells, call it what you like. It has been a long and a very rocky road. But I suppose my take, the bottom line really for me really is that I think there are upwards of 38,000 residents in Farnham. And there have been 61 objections to this particular application. It's a further 10. Hardly a major percentage. And we have, I think, 15 of those 71 objectors as well in the public gallery. I would support Mrs. Frost. For God's sake, these are minor material amendments. Let us get on with it, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ellis. Now, Councillor Fraser, we've gone through this. In your original speech, I gave you latitude. I thought it only reasonable to give you latitude to talk about all sorts of things which are totally unrelated to the actual application that we are considering. They're all done deals, the things that you would talk about. Is there anything you wish to come back on that is particularly pertinent to the application that we have in front of us, which people have said is non-material, small amendment or relatively small amendments and proposals, as Councillor Frost said, to the movement of the Gostrey Centre? Is there anything more that you wish to say now, precisely, or can we now go to the vote?
You're very generous, Mr. Chairman. As an engineer in my previous incarnation, there is one item I would like to return to, and that is the impending desecration of the Waverley walk or footpath to become a haul road for the erection of the accommodation bridge. This still seems to be undecided. I did make an engineering case for it to be launched, but I've heard indirectly that it's considered to be a little too expensive. I would like to make a plea for that to be dealt with and for the councillors to be told how we're going to erect the accommodation bridge to relieve the congestion on Farnham Town Centre roads. I'm also very concerned about the impending relocation of sewers that appear to have been forgotten in the original design.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Well, I mean, the points that you're making now still are not related in any way to the application that we have in front of us this evening. We recognise your concerns. We recognise the concerns that have been expressed by members of the public. I believe we've dealt with those in the past in other planning applications, and this will move forward as swiftly as possible. Like Councillor Ellis, and I think Councillor Frost, we've been here a long time and we've listened to lots of debates over many, many years.
Thank you for returning, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. So can we now... So, Councillor Holder, you should speak.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak at this late juncture. I notice that the applicant has stated that the amendments that he's proposed will have a minimal visual impact on the development. And so I'm just curious, on page 4, building D14, what this huge structure is that's been built on top of the roof. It looks like a kind of carbuncle of some sort. I'm not sure what it is. So I'll be grateful if somebody explain exactly what it is.
It's actually, apologies because of the small size of the slide. If it had been up on the screen, you would have been able to see it more clearly. But it's actually just a piece of writing which is actually above the roof. It's an annotation. I can't read it and I can't remember what it says, but it's not actually attached to the building. It's just an annotation to the plan. Thank you.
If you wish, Councillor Holder, we'll have it as a banner and illuminated for you to look at before we actually open the buildings. Interesting problem in trying to determine what's happening from a very small representation.
When we move to the recommendation, if we could just remember, when we do the recommendation, to make a comment to say that we're also taking into account the oral update that Louise gave us about the conditions. You know, this that I showed you about them referring to a different condition. If we refer to that when we do the recommendation.
Well, perhaps Louise should make that comment.
Because Louise did mention that in the oral update.
Yeah.
So
Louise, Gary is pointing out something that you mentioned in an email earlier today. Would you like to read out that change that or clarification that you're only before we actually go to the revised recommendation?
Okay, so members, I pointed out that there was an oral update in relation to conditions 4, 13, 48 and 51. These all refer to the phasing being within condition 2. That is an error and they should all refer to condition 1.
Thank you very much. And you already said that actually, didn't you? You had said it earlier. So I'm sorry to bring you back in again. So members, can we now go to the revised recommendation that having regard to the environmental information contained in the application, the accompanying environmental statement and responses to it, together with the mitigation of environmental effects and subject to the completion of an amendment to the original legal agreement of the 22nd of August by the 22nd of August 2016 and conditions 1 to 62 on the agenda report and amended conditions 2 and 63 on the update sheet, that permission be granted. Can I please have a show of hands of all those that agree, wish to support that recommendation?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 for.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And those against? States that if the requirements of the recommendation are not met, permission be refused. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. We now have a second application to deal with, and that's item A2, WA 2016-0456, land at East Street, Farnham. And I'm reading from the wrong sheet. An application under section 19, listed building consent, to vary condition 6 of WA 2014-1926 approved plan numbers to allow a variation to the extension and alterations permitted at Brightwell House, Brightwells Road, Farnham. We haven't got something on the screen to look at. The excitement.
Thank you, Chairman. Brightwell House is located within the centre of the East Street site that we've just discussed here. It is a Grade 2 listed building. The amendments to this scheme in comparison to the extant permission would include the increase in the size of the ground floor extension, which is under part of the proposed canopy, and an increase in size of the first floor extensions. In addition to this, the internal amendments would include the removal of existing walls, the provision of new openings and partition walls, the installation of a lift, and the replacement of doors. This slide shows the south elevation. The extension on the ground floor would be positioned here under the proposed canopy, which has been permitted as part of the extant scheme. As such, the overall appearance from the front elevation would remain broadly similar to that which has already been approved. This slide shows the north and east elevations, and here you can see the extension to the first floor, which is here in relation to the extant permission, and also along here in relation to the extant permission. This slide shows the ground floor plans, and the ground floor extension would be just here and would project slightly further forward towards the front elevation than the extant scheme. As I've said, this is under a canopy which was granted as part of the extant scheme. This slide shows the first floor, and the enlargement would be positioned wrapping around the extant permission, which was here, and the proposal would project further in depth and have a greater width. Also, there are internal alterations proposed, which would include the removal of walls here and here, and the installation of new partition walls here and here. The Council's Heritage Officer has confirmed that the harm to the listed building as a result of the changes would be less than substantial. This less than substantial harm would be outweighed by the benefits of the scheme, which include the provision of a sustainable long-term future for Brightwell House and the economic and social benefits to the residents of Waverley from the overall scheme. Members should also take into consideration the removal of the unsympathetic existing extension to Brightwell House, which is a further benefit. Can I draw members' attention to the update sheet, which outlines an additional representation which was received? And finally, the matters for members' judgment this evening is the impact on the heritage asset, which is the Grade 2 listed Brightwell House. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Edwards, we have public speakers beforehand, unless you've got something particular else to say. Sorry about it. So we have two public speakers, and the first one is Abigail McKern. Should you come forward? Good evening. You just switch on the microphone, and when you're ready to speak, we will start the clock.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. I speak on behalf of objectors to this new application for building consent on Grade 2 listed Brightwell House. This elegant late Georgian building forms the centrepiece of the development, and therefore is crucial that any new addition should respect and, if possible, enhance its architectural qualities. If you look at the illustrations of the elevations in the officer's report, you will see that it is proposed to raise the height of the extension to the level of the roof eaves. This will make all its bulk clearly visible from the north, the east, and the west. The developers are applying for a minor material amendment of an increase in size of 13% of the gross internal area, but I ask you to consider whether you are being misled by this figure. Can they explain how the gross increase in cubic capacity of the first floor extension can be accounted for using only a 13% increase to the footprint of the building? Your office's report actually admits to a total of 35.4% increase. This is a hugely significant enlargement to the original approved design. Your officers also conclude that the width of the extension fails to preserve the character of the listed building. It is interesting to note that the newly branded Historic England responded to this listed building application with a no comment. Its predecessor, English Heritage, however, had a very different opinion and concluded the whole development should be redesigned to respect the heritage asset at its core. It is stated in the NPPF at paragraph 14 that at the heart of the National Planning Policy Framework is a presumption in favour of sustainable development, which should be seen as a golden thread running through both plan making and decision taking. Objectors feel that this proposed extension represents an unsustainable blot on the landscape rather than any kind of relationship with a golden thread. Waverley officers excuse the inappropriateness of this bulky extension by pinning their hopes on the possibility of it securing a long-term future for Brightwell House in terms of economic benefit. This is the supposed justification of extra space for yet another restaurant, which will contain a previously unplanned plant room and extra seating. Farnham Town already boasts over 50 restaurants and eateries. Instead of demolishing an excellent cultural asset in the form of a purpose-built auditorium, why not restore the theatre instead? Here is a quote from the Government Department of Culture, Media and Sport. The creative industries are worth £8 million an hour to the UK economy. That's £71.4 billion a year. This outperforms all other main industry sectors, including, please note, the restaurant sector. The theatre building, with its roofline well below that of Brightwell House, is protected by the listing of Brightwell House to which it is attached and should be claimed as a cultural asset for the town, attracting tourists and visitors. The National Planning Policy Framework advises at HE32 that such assets have potential to be a catalyst for regeneration of an area, in particular for leisure, tourism and economic development. As a final thought to leave you with, here is another quote from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. The arts provides over 2 million jobs for our country and are mentioned by 8 out of 10 tourists as a reason for their visit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we now have a second speaker from Farnham Town Council, Councillor Kiki Mirrlees. Sorry, Councillor Mirrlees has a wish to speak again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Farnham Town Council objects to this application also. Again, as pointed out previously, the change is required to accommodate an extension of which it actually looks a whole lot larger than 13% floor space to Brightwell House is considered significant and once again even more so taken in conjunction with the numerous other amendments that are being requested and requires a new planning application to be submitted. By allowing this extension to be bolted onto Brightwell House for another restaurant, we remove what could be and would be a real community asset, our Redgrave Theatre. In addition, in 2015, English Heritage encouraged further consideration of the retention of the curtilage-listed structures, including the boundary walls and cottage, which contribute to the significance of the 18th century Brightwell House. This is an opportune time to consider these expert recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, Councillor Edwards, you wish to speak?
I don't want to speak on this item, thank you.
Are there any other speakers? I don't think there's very much more to say. It is just, I say just, it is a listed building consent change. I must admit that looking at the drawings and looking at the building yesterday, I consider that it is a small amendment and visually it won't make much difference. Sorry, Councillor Frost, you couldn't hear me properly.
Sorry, Chairman, I'm obviously going deaf in my old age, but we need you to speak actually into the microphone.
Like what I'm doing.
Like what I'm doing.
You fell into
But my voice carries anyway. So
you fell into
if
the
you
trap.
could, that would be so helpful.
Thank you very much. It was not of great importance anyway. Can we now move to the recommendation, which is that subject to conditions 1 to 6 as set out in the report, listed building consent be granted. Can I have a show of hands, please, for those in you don't need to count the numbers.
19.
And those against?
1.
Thank you very much. That application has been approved. Thank you very much for your time and your consideration. I do apologise, and I'm sure the officers would wish to apologise for the fact that we did not have a truly visual presentation, but we did on the second. So thank you very much indeed, and good night to everybody.